we're a building compliance consultancy, so we offer a complete range of building compliance, surveying and consultancy. We're currently supporting with the development of building safety cases, as well as a tailored range of consultancy services on a wide array of properties. We support in making informed decisions on best practices in managing social housing stock, ensuring adherence to statutory legal requirements whilst reducing risk and realising the full potential of those properties.
So it establishes a new building safety regulator, brings in new requirements relating to the life cycle of the building. So there are going to be various provisions relating to everything from the planning and the design stage and the obtaining building control approval, and right through construction, completion, operation and maintenance. And the golden thread was referred to by Anton, in terms of keeping a real record of what has happened and what needs to happen in relation to the building from a safety perspective. There's a new building control regime with more onerous stipulations for higher risk buildings, which are a nice three-letter acronym. Of course, the legal world, just like any other, likes a three-letter acronym, so HRRBs. And changes to legal remedies. So one of the really big ones and that we've already utilised is the fact that the Defective Premises Act, which used to have a limitation date, a long stop date of 15 years from the cause of action, has now been extended to 30 years. So there were a great deal actually of properties that would otherwise have been caught out with owners unable to receive a remedy, which has now been retrospectively extended, and that's relatively unusual for the English legal system. But there are new issues around enforcement. There's the option to make building liability orders, and also creation of a new homes ombudsman in order to provide initial recourse in relation to problems with new homes. The Act also looks at the competence of individuals involved with buildings. There's quite a bit of crossover between a lot of these, but particularly building control inspectors themselves, and the standards which they're using, whether they will be working directly for the building safety regulator or whether regulated by them. Also, particular duties in relation to duty holders, so the principal designer and the principal contractor, and indeed authorised persons once the building is in occupation. So there's a real look at, have you got the right people? Do they have the right knowledge in order to be in the positions that they're in? They're also looking at competence of individuals across the entire built environment sector. So, in terms of best practice, professionals such as architects and structural engineers, where issues arise, ensuring that is passed down. There's the developer levy, and looking at putting restrictions on developers who aren't complying with their obligations in relation to building safety on schemes that they've already built out. There is changes to fire safety legislation itself. There's leaseholder protection, so that in the event of particularly issues with cladding, which can be very expensive, and in the past, charges may well have been tried to pass on to leaseholders through service charges and so on. There are now very limited situations in which that sort of thing can happen, where it's a building safety issue. And as I touched on before, a focus on construction products themselves and not just the process of designing and building.
Consequences of not meeting deadlines. It's often a question we get asked when discussing and collaborating. And obviously in one sense it isn't something that needs to be considered, other than for the purpose of engaging stakeholders internally for really just driving forward the urgency. if you're struggling, it is critical to highlight some of the consequences. We do know the especially with the Building Safety Act, it obviously hasn't been clearly stated in every detail as to what actually the detail of the prosecutions. But just to firstly go over, obviously, if we focus on the registration deadline, obviously there's a lot more clarity that's been provided. But as we see on the screen, the principal accountable person, which I'm sure there's many on this call today, must make the relevant applications before 1st October. Obviously, we know that we've known that for a long time, and failure to do so is a criminal offence. So the regulator had expressed, obviously, its desire to work with building owners and yourselves as landlords, where possible in these circumstances. But what we've also got to consider is the main point around where how they've taken enforcement action on the stance that the government has taken on naming developers who did not sign up to the developer pledge. Obviously, this not only had legal consequences, but also a lot of adverse publicity. And also, from the other side of and in the other area, it will be a criminal offence to allow a new high-rise building to be occupied before registration with the BSR. So I know Paul covered off this briefly, but I just wanted to cover a couple of details because, especially for those on this call, is see the Building Safety Regulator. It is stated within the Acts that they can also particularly prosecute individuals of the corporate bodies in certain circumstances, which is the main point as individuals we need to consider. Some of the potential offences under, I believe it's section 161 part 4, where it talks about the management of safety risks of occupied high-risk buildings. They list out the key offences, which are what are the key points to really take note of. See, number one being allowing the occupation of the high-risk building without a completion certificate. And then, number one being a failure to register an occupied high-risk building. And number three, failure to apply for a building assessment certificate without reasonable excuse. And then failure to display a building assessment certificate. And then also another point being failure to give prescribed information to the Building Safety Regulator when requested. So as we all know, from April 2024, the regulator will start, as per the timeline, as has been stated, that they will start asking and requesting the information from yourselves as landlords to submit the cases in view of obviously providing a building assessment certificate. So I think that's the main point, is ensuring we're ready to answer the questions and understanding as an individual this may affect you individually.
And what I'm going to talk about here are some of the messages that we would give to a client in an ideal world. And I think we've probably got to acknowledge that we're not in an ideal world. In some instances, we have deadlines that are approaching, and it may well be that we don't have the luxury of taking to some of these steps. But in an ideal world, if we had time to prepare and plan and we had minimal buildings that we were talking about, this is the process that we would take. And the advice that we always give to all of our landlords, to all of our building owners, is that you really do have to take ownership of the procurement. Yes, you may very well make a decision that you want to procure support. Yes, you might want to make a decision that you're going to need expert advice, but it's not as simple as transferring all of that responsibility and that onus onto them. As Fraser talked about there, the buy-in of stakeholders is absolutely key and really, really important. And what we tend to find is that the more input you have into that procurement, the better it is. With all of our procurements, we start with a really simple question, which is what does good look like? So what outcomes do you want from this, and what gives you the best possible option to get those outcomes in terms of the information that you can provide, the level of detail that you put into your specification. Now, unfortunately, what we're talking about here in terms of building safety cases, the guidance of what good looks like is currently quite poor. We don't actually know directly what a good building safety case should look like. But obviously, the people that I'm talking to here, the audience, you're all experienced professionals with enough knowledge to have an indication of what you think it looks like. So take some time to think about that and take some ownership of your outcome. You'll see here that the one sort of fancy bit of PowerPoint that I've done there is an idea of some of the things that potentially you might want to consider, and the things that Fraser has touched on. But think about what information you currently hold. Think about your FRAs, your floor plans, the cladding and insulation material in the building. Do you have the original building information? Is there anything specific about the residents that we need to consider? These are all fairly obvious things, but it is worthwhile, in our experience, taking the time to understand what you know already about the building, and then identify what you think you need to know. And there's plenty of guidance out there. Health and Safety Executive have some pages dedicated to the building safety case, and they'll give you a clue of the type of information you might want to consider.